My name is Edison Mangeris, and today I will be providing a look at the history of Cynic philosophy and psychology. So we start by asking, what is Cynicism? Cynicism is a philosophical and psychological school of thought developed in ancient Greece that teaches that life should be lived in accordance with nature, and that is to be free of the pursuit of status, wealth, or any sort of material desires or gain. If you were to refer to someone today as a cynic, you would likely be met with some sort of negative reaction, as the modern day definition does tend to hold a negative connotation. This is, however, very different and holds little relation to the definition of the ancient cynics. While calling someone a cynic today implies they may have a sort of pessimistic or bleak outlook on their lives or attitude, the ancient cynics simply rejected the conventional values we as humans placed on money, fame, and power. The term cynic originates from the ancient Greek words kynikos, meaning dog-like, and kion, meaning dog. Although historians are not entirely sure what the reason for this naming convention is exactly, there are a few common theories. The first Cynic, Antisthenes, taught in Athens' Xenocargis Gymnasium. The second theory being that Cynic ideology is almost dog-like, enjoying life's simplest pleasures, such as sunlight or a cool breeze on a hot day. And the final theory is that cynics were actually named by their critics due to their perceived vulgar and shameless public behavior. The Cynics were among the first philosophers to emphasize the importance of living a virtuous life, and their emphasis on self sufficiency and independence has greatly influenced philosophical movements that have come after it, like Stoicism or the Epicureans. In addition to this, the Cynics' critical and skeptical approach to social conventions and high authority figures has been a recurring theme in Western philosophy. The Cynics' questioning of traditional values and the established order is an idea and concept that has been used by the philosophers of yesteryear and today quite frequently, and do include the works of famous names as well, such as Friedrich Nietzsche, who was also heavily influenced by Cynic philosophy. To get a good grasp of the history of the Cynics, we do need to go back, and that would take us to Antisthenes. Accounts tend to vary, but Antisthenes is typically regarded as the founder of the ancient Greek Cynic school of thought. He was born into a wealthy and influential family, and many of what Antisthenes taught stemmed from the corruption and injustices he would witness within society from this place of privilege. Using this privilege, he was able to go to school and become a devout disciple of Socrates, and was even present at the time of his death. So indebted to him, he would also bring friends of his along to walk for miles to simply attend one of Socrates' lectures. Antisthenes emphasized the importance of living a simple life and rejecting material possessions. He believed that virtue was the only true way of achieving happiness in life. He was known for his harsh criticism of the Athenian society and the values it held. He often spoke out against the hypocrisy and corruption of Athenian elites, as it is something he had seen firsthand in his own life. He believed that true freedom could only be achieved by rejecting social conventions and living in accordance with how nature intended. The crux of Antisthenes' teachings were that there were two categories of goods that humans sought after in life. The first being external goods, which included money, property, sex, influence. And then there were internal goods, which included more abstract objects such as truth, knowledge, and virtues. Antisthenes encouraged his followers to limit their hunger for external goods and to strengthen the desire for internal goods like truth and knowledge. He truly believed that increasing the soul's internal wealth would lead to a more virtuous and fulfilling life. Even after his passing, his teachings long survived him with the disciples that came after him. Perhaps the best description of the personality and character of Antisthenes comes from the biographer Diogenes Laertius. Not to be confused with Diogenes of Sinople, who we will get to very shortly. Diogenes Laertius was a biographer who detailed the lives and ideas of many philosophers. While most of his writing was destroyed, his surviving work, The Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers, paints a good picture of the kind of man Antisthenes was. Diogenes writes, "He was the original cause of the apathy of Diogenes, and the temperance of Crates, and the patience of Zeno, having himself, as it were, laid the foundations of the city which they afterwards built." And Xenophon says that in his conversation and society he was the most delightful of men, and in every respect the most temperate. So now we get to Diogenes, or better known as Diogenes of Sinope. He may have not been the founder of Cynicism, but most will tell you that no man embodied this lifestyle and virtue quite as he did. Although most of what we know about Diogenes is theorized by philosophers that came after him, there are still many stories and accounts that paint the ancient Greek philosopher as being this eccentric anomaly to his peers. Not much is known about Diogenes' early life, but what does tend to be agreed upon was that he was exiled from his birthplace of Sinople for defacing the city's currency. It is during this exile that Diogenes eventually meets Antisthenes. Diogenes eventually adopts his teachings and goes on to become possibly the most famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, face of the Cynic philosophical movement. What made Diogenes a bit of a celebrity to the people of ancient Greece was his simplistic lifestyle and rejection of common social conventions. He believed in the importance of self reliance and self sufficiency. A few examples of this are as follows. He did live inside of a barrel. His diet was comprised of just onions and water. He once had a wooden bowl that he disposed of after seeing a peasant boy cup and drink water from a puddle with his hands. He would then exclaim why he was not doing that prior. And legends state that he would hold up a lantern or possibly a candle to the faces of the citizens of Athens to try and look for an honest man. What many would consider to be Diogenes' most famous tale comes from a chance encounter with Alexander the Great. An admirer of Diogenes, the Macedonian king traveled to the city of Athens to seek out the Cynic to grant him whatever it is that he desired. Upon meeting him, Alexander would ask him what he'd wish for. Diogenes simply requested that Alexander move to the side as he was blocking the sunlight that he was sitting in. Naturally, as a man whose life drew much wonder and speculation, so too did his death. Diogenes' death has been a point of contention for a long time, and many feel as though it must have been as eccentric and unusual as the man himself. Accounts vary wildly, but some say that he met a voluntary death by holding his breath. Some say he fell ill due to eating raw octopus, and there are others that believe an infected dog bite brought forth his demise. As interesting and bombastic as these deaths may seem, it is much more likely that he simply met his end due to old age. Throughout his life, Diogenes is reported to have written over 10 books, 7 tragedies, and an entire volume of letters. So influential was the Cynic from Athens that although not a single one of his works survived, his eccentric attitude and larger than life personality allowed his name to transcend history and to stand the test of time. Despite being quite a polarizing figure in ancient Greece, Diogenes did inspire many followers. This would include Crates of Thebes, whom many would consider to be the third major influential figure in Cynic philosophy. A pupil of Diogenes, Crates and his wife Hipparchia gave up their wealth and fortune to live a more missionary lifestyle, one that was in accordance to Cynic views. It was in fact Hipparchia who pleaded to her wealthy family to allow her to live the Cynic lifestyle that Crates pursued. Crates was also known for parodying poetry and other philosophers as a means to spread the word of cynicism throughout ancient Greece. Crates indirectly brought rise to a new school of thought. He was admired greatly by his student Zeno of Citium. Zeno would go on to found Stoicism and become known as Zeno the Stoic. Much of the philosophy used to develop Stoicism was thanks in part to the teachings of Crates. Of course, we cannot talk about Crates of Thebes without mentioning his devoted wife, Hipparchia of Maronea. A Cynic philosopher in her own right, she was also one of the few women philosophers in all of ancient Greek history. Biographer Diogenes Laertius claims that Hipparchia was so eager to wed Crates that she would have rather killed herself than living without him. The pair are also infamous for having consummated their marriage in the public eye. Given her lavish upbringing, many felt it surprising that she would throw away all of her material wealth to live a Cynic lifestyle. Ultimately, her devotion to Crates and what he represented was so strong, however, that she felt compelled to uphold Cynic ideals and virtues. Hipparchia's brother, Metrocles of Maronea, was also a Cynic philosopher. While not a lot of his writings survived, likely due to his own burning of them, he is noteworthy for being one of the very first Cynics to practice writing moral anecdotes about Diogenes and the other Cynic philosophers. Metrocles objected to the concept of wealth unless it was put to a good cause. Buying goods for the sake of vanity was something he deeply despised. However, money being put towards positive facets of society, such as improving education, were seen as being commendable. Perhaps the oddest Cynic philosopher, aside from Diogenes, is Secundus the Silent. Most of what is known about the philosopher comes from an anonymous text titled Life of Secundus. Born in the early 2nd century, he took a vow of silence after his mother took her own life due to Secundus tricking her into sleeping with him. Having heard of this silent philosopher, Emperor Hadrian summoned Secundus to speak or be executed. Secundus, however, would not budge, but did allow the emperor to ask any question he desired, and he would write the answers on a slab. His most famous answer came from when he was asked, "What is poverty?" Secundus replies, "A good thing that is hated, the mother of health, a hindrance to pleasures, a way of life free of worry, a possession hard to cast off, the teacher of intentions, the finder of wisdom, a business that nobody envies, property unassessed, merchandise not subject to tariff, profit not to be reckoned in terms of cash, a possession not interfered with by informers, non-evident good fortune free of care." Another Cynic philosopher emerged at around this time by the name of Bion of Beresthenes. He was a Greek philosopher, preacher, and writer. Again, not much is known about his early life. He was the son of a courtesan and a freed slave as well. Um, and although not as famous as his contemporaries, his major contribution is the creation of the Cynic diatribe, or the popular discourse on morality. Many feel that this discourse was the major influence of the Christian sermon that we know of today. Very few of his writings did survive, but through his diatribe, he still lives on. So we get to another lesser known name in the history of Cynic philosophy, that being Theombrotus, or Theombrotus. He was a student of Diogenes and one of the founding Cynic philosophers. He was also a very polarizing and controversial figure in ancient Greece. He heavily criticized the ideas and works of Plato and Socrates and heavily preached poverty. He is possibly most infamous for throwing himself off a high wall after reading Plato's work on the immortality of the soul, and ultimately concluding that he would be better off in the next life than the current. Going back for just a moment to Crates of Thebes, as mentioned, he had helped inspire the leader of the Stoic school of thought, Zeno of Citium. Although not recognized as being a Cynic philosopher, still embodied many of the qualities and ideals that Cynics strived for. He attended many of Crates' lectures and considered him a major influence in his life. A lot of the logic and theory that he used to inspire the creation of Stoicism can also be traced back to Antisthenes and his ideas. The Cynics had a significant influence on philosophical movements that came after them, particularly the Stoics and the Epicureans. The Stoics were active in the Hellenistic period, shared some of the Cynics' beliefs, such as the idea that virtue was the only true way of achieving happiness, and that material possessions were unimportant. However, the Stoics differed from the Cynics in their emphasis on living in harmony with the rational order of the world and their belief in the existence of a divine providence. The Epicureans, who were also active in the Hellenistic period, rejected the Cynics' emphasis on living a simple life and rejected the idea that virtue was the only source of happiness. However, they did share some of the Cynic skepticism towards social conventions and the belief in the importance of cultivating personal relationships. The Cynics also had an impact on later philosophical and literary movements. The Roman philosopher and statesman, for example, Seneca, was heavily influenced by the Cynics, and the French philosopher Michel Foucault wrote extensively on the Cynics' rejection of conventional norms and their emphasis on the importance of self-care. Additionally, the Cynics were often celebrated in ancient Greek and Roman literature after their time as examples of courageous and independent individuals unafraid to change unafraid to change themselves in the face of the status quo. From this point in history, where Stoicism would rise, Cynicism would begin to see a steady decline. Although the Cynic school of thought would see this decline in the late 3rd century BC, its message is still quite relevant today. In terms of psychology, the Cynic core principles can provide guidance on how to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. This is especially so in a world that does tend to emphasize the value of material wealth, power, and status over one's own well-being and virtues. Cynic teachings can be particularly useful in a society that often pressures individuals to constantly strive for more and to accumulate more wealth and possessions. The pursuit of these external goods can often lead to stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction in one's own life. A major takeaway and interpretation of the Cynic outlook on life is that their emphasis on living in accordance with nature and fully embracing the present moment can assist individuals in obtaining mindfulness and finding contentment in their everyday lives. Overall, the Cynic philosophy provides an invaluable perspective on how to live a meaningful life by focusing on the development of one's own character and finding a sense of inner peace and contentment, rather than seeking fulfillment through external rewards and meaningless accolades. A commonality shared with many Cynic philosophers is that unfortunately most of their writings and works did not survive to be present today. This begs the question as to how Cynic ideas and themes managed to outlive the philosophers who champion these ideas and their written works as well. Looking through history, we tend to find that the rather boisterous and bombastic tales of Cynic philosophers are plenty. One could even argue that no school of thought produced such a fascinating, intriguing group of followers across the board. Cynic philosophy and psychology, although not existing as it did during the times of ancient Greece, still holds major weight in terms of its overall influence. Through colorful, eccentric individuals such as Diogenes the Cynic, the teachings and stories managed to withstand the test of time and retain their relevancy even today. Of course, there is no need to give up our livelihoods and live in a barrel to achieve contentment. Applying the core beliefs of improving one's inner wealth can prove to be a fulfilling and enriching experience. Thank you.